Ilara was 22 the year her world shrank to the size of a single satchel. It was not a violent shrinking, no dramatic shattering of glass or splintering of doors. It was a quiet, administrative erasure. Her father, a man who had seemed as permanent as the granite mountains he surveyed, had been gone for 2 years. Her mother, a woman who had once been a whirlwind of laughter and warmth, had remarried a man named Marcus, a man who valued silence and clean ledgers above all else. The house, the one her father had built with his own hands, its beams true and its corners square, had been sold. Marcus delivered the news over a cold breakfast, his voice as flat and grey as the morning fog outside. He did not look at her. He simply stated facts as if reading from a property assessment. The sale was final. The new owners would arrive in a week. Her mother had already left to prepare their new, smaller home in the city. There was, he explained without a trace of apology, no room for Ilara. She did not cry, she did not plead. The grief for her father had hollowed out a space inside her that was now simply a quiet, echoing void. Her mother's departure felt less like an abandonment and more like the final, inevitable settling of a house into its foundation of sorrow. Arguing with Marcus would be like arguing with the tide. He was a force of quiet, implacable momentum. He slid a thin envelope across the polished table. "Your mother and I agreed this is fair," he said. A final settlement. Inside were $200. It was an insult, a dismissal, a sum so small it was meant to underscore her complete and utter dependency, a dependency he was now severing with surgical precision. She took the envelope, the crisp paper cool against her numb fingers. Her father, Daniel, had been a surveyor, a man who spoke the language of the land. He read contours and elevations like other men read novels. He had taught her not with lectures but by example. She had spent her childhood as his shadow, scrambling over rockfalls and through dense forests. He taught her how to use a compass and a sextant, how to read the story of a landscape in its rocks and trees. He taught her that the shortest distance between 2 points was not always the best path. He taught her that true north was a constant, a reliable truth in a world of shifting perspectives. He had not left her money. His long illness had consumed everything. He had not left her property. That, it turned out, had been in her mother's name. He had left her 2 things of substance. The first was a small, heavy, brass plumb bob, its point still needle-sharp, its body worn to a soft gleam from the calloused grip of his hand. It was a tool of truth, a perfect, unarguable line to the center of the earth. It lived in a worn leather pouch on her belt. The second was his personal Bible, a King James version with a cover as cracked and weathered as a riverbed in a drought. It was not a book he had preached from, but one he had consulted in quiet moments, its margins filled with his precise, angular notes on geology and botany, not theology. Up in her room, the air already felt stale, impersonal. She packed her father's canvas satchel with a ruthless efficiency he would have admired. A change of clothes, a whetstone, a small hand adze, a dovetail saw, and a set of chisels, all perfectly maintained. A small tin of dried meat and a full canteen. She tucked the insulting envelope of money into an inner pocket. Lastly, she took the plumb bob and the old Bible. Everything else, the furniture, the books, the memories that clung to the walls like dust, she left behind. They belonged to a life that was no longer hers. She walked down the stairs, past the grandfather clock her father had loved, its steady ticking now sounding like a countdown to her own obsolescence. Marcus was in his study, his back to the door. He did not turn as she passed the open doorway. She did not say goodbye. There was nothing left to say. She closed the front door quietly behind her, the click of the latch a final, definitive sound. She did not look back. She set her face toward the jagged line of the western mountains and began to walk. The journey was a blur of dusty roads and indifferent skies. She walked for days, sleeping in barns or under the shelter of rocky overhangs, the brass plumb bob a comforting weight against her hip. She ate sparingly, husbanding her resources with the same care her father had taught her to use when plotting a traverse across a difficult landscape. The physical hardship was a balm, a simple, honest pain that overshadowed the more complex ache in her chest. The world had cast her out, but the ground was still solid beneath her feet. The sun still rose. These were the truths she clung to. She was heading for the Cinder Peaks, a remote and unforgiving range that had been the last great project of her father's career. He had spoken of it with a kind of weary reverence, a place of stark beauty and profound solitude. She had no plan, only a direction. An object in motion, a surveyor might say, stays in motion. After nearly a week of walking, she limped into the town of Terminus. It was aptly named. It was the end of a defunct spur line, a collection of tired-looking buildings huddled against the relentless wind that swept down from the mountain passes. The railway tracks, which had once been the town's lifeblood, were now two streaks of rust disappearing into the sagebrush. It was a place that had been forgotten by progress, a town clinging to existence by a thread of stubbornness. She found the only saloon, a place that also served as the town's general store and unofficial civic center. The air was thick with the smell of stale beer, sawdust, and frying bacon. A few grizzled men in worn work clothes were hunched over the bar or seated at rough-hewn tables. She took a seat in a dark corner, ordering a mug of water and a plate of beans, feeling the weight of their curious stares. She was a stranger, and in a town this small, a stranger was an event. It was there she overheard the conversation. Two men, a burly teamster and a thin, weaselly-looking man she took to be some kind of clerk, were laughing. "Sold it yet, Abe?" the teamster rumbled. "Abe," the clerk snorted. "Sold it? I'd have to pay someone to take that pile of rocks. The county wants it off the books, but who in their right mind would pay good money for the old terminus depot? It's a ghost. Cursed, they say." "Silas Kane's ghost," the teamster added, his voice dropping theatrically. "Still waiting for a train that'll never come, still guarding his stolen gold." "Fairy tales," Abe scoffed, but he looked uneasy. "It's a ruin. The roof is gone, the walls are crumbling. The tax assessment is $200 for the land itself. The building's listed as a liability." Ilara's head snapped up. $200, the exact sum in her pocket. It felt like less of a coincidence and more of a sign, a data point aligning on a map only she could see. A liability. Her father had taught her that one man's liability was another's opportunity. It all depended on how you surveyed the situation. She finished her beans, the silence in her corner of the room feeling solid and heavy. She walked to the bar, placing her empty plate down gently. The men fell silent, watching her. She looked at the clerk, Abe. Her voice, when it came, was quiet but clear, unused to speaking but steady. "The terminus depot," she said. "I'll buy it." A stunned silence fell over the saloon. Then the teamster let out a great bark of laughter. Abe stared at her, his mouth slightly agape. "You, little lady, you don't want that place. It's not fit for habitation." "I'm not looking for habitation," she replied, her gaze unwavering. "I'm looking for a deed. You said $200. Abe, recovering his composure, gave a smirk that was equal parts pity and amusement. He clearly saw this as the punchline to a long-running joke. "All right, your funeral. The money's good. The deed is yours." He gestured to a small, dusty office at the back of the building. The transaction was brief. She counted out the worn bills onto his cluttered desk. He filled out the deed with a scratchy pen, his movements sloppy, as if the whole affair were beneath his dignity. He didn't ask her name, just wrote "the bearer" on the line for the grantee. He pushed the paper across the desk. "There. You are now the proud owner of the most worthless piece of property in Cinder County. Good luck with the ghosts." He chuckled to himself. Ilara folded the deed and placed it in her satchel. She felt no triumph, only a grim sense of purpose. She had traded all the money she had in the world for a ruin, a ghost story, and a joke. But it was hers. For the first time in her life, she owned a piece of the earth, however broken. The walk to the depot took another hour, following the ghost of the railway line deeper into the foothills. The landscape grew starker, the trees giving way to wind-scoured rock and hardy scrub, and then she saw it. It was perched on a wide, flat promontory overlooking a vast, empty valley. Even in its dereliction, it was magnificent. It was not a simple wooden shack. It was a fortress, built of massive granite blocks quarried from the mountainside itself. It had the proud, solid lines of a structure built to endure, but Abe had not been lying about its condition. The great slate roof had collapsed in the center, leaving a jagged maw open to the sky. Most of the tall, arched windows were shattered, their frames rotting. A thick shroud of vines and debris clung to the stone, and the grand entrance was blocked by a fall of masonry. For a long moment, Ilara felt a cold wave of despair wash over her, so powerful it buckled her knees. The wind howled through the broken windows, a mournful, lonely sound. What had she done? She had traded her meager security for a pile of rubble. The clerk's laughter echoed in her ears. She was a fool, a girl playing at being a survivor. She sank to the ground, the satchel slipping from her shoulder, the weight of her journey, her grief, her foolishness, pressed down on her. She sat there for a long time, watching the sun dip towards the jagged peaks, painting the sky in brutal shades of orange and purple. The air grew cold. Then her hand brushed against the leather pouch on her hip. She drew out the brass plumb bob. It felt cool and solid in her palm, a small, dense point of certainty in a world of chaos. Her father's voice, a low rumble in her memory. Find your vertical, know what's true, start there. She stood up, the despair receded, replaced by the familiar calm resolve of a problem to be solved. She would not try to fix the whole thing at once. That way lay madness. She would do what she had always done, break the problem down into smaller, manageable parts. The first problem was shelter. She began a systematic survey of the exterior, her eyes now assessing for structural integrity, not aesthetic ruin. The main hall was a disaster, but the two wings, the old ticket office and the station master's quarters, seemed more intact. The ticket office, a smaller, squat section of the building, had a portion of its roof still in place, protected by the bulk of the main wall. She found a way in through a broken window, carefully clearing the jagged shards of glass first. The inside was a time capsule of decay. Dust lay thick as a blanket on everything. Cobwebs, heavy as funeral shrouds, draped from the ceiling, but the stone walls were sound. The floor, made of thick 2-inch oak planks, was buckled and water-damaged in places but largely solid beneath the filth. In one corner stood a great stone hearth, black with the soot of 1,000 fires, a testament to colder nights than this. This would be her starting point. This would be her shelter. That first night was the longest of her life. She barricaded the broken window with a piece of a fallen door and built a small, cautious fire in the great hearth. The smoke, thankfully, found its way up the chimney. She ate the last of her dried meat and huddled in her thin blanket, listening to the symphony of the ruin, the groan of old wood, the skittering of unseen creatures, the constant sighing voice of the wind. She was not afraid. Loneliness was an old acquaintance. In the flickering firelight, she took out her father's Bible. Her hands, caked with the grime of her new home, trembled slightly as she opened it. He had not been a devout man in the traditional sense, but he had a deep faith in the order of the physical world. She had never known why he kept this book so close. She turned to the page marked with a thin, faded leather ribbon. It was in the book of Isaiah. She expected a comforting verse, a passage on strength or perseverance. But that was not what was marked. Her father's precise pencil marks did not underline a verse. They altered the page itself. At the top of the page, he had drawn a perfect compass rose. Along the margins, he had made a series of notations. Numbers and symbols she recognized instantly from his survey maps. They were bearings, elevations, distances. And in the center of the page, obscuring the holy text, was a crudely but accurately drawn floor plan of a building with a large central hall and 2 wings, the terminus depot. Her breath caught in her throat. This was no holy message. This was a map. Her father had been here. He had surveyed this very building. A small X was marked on the drawing, located on the left side of the main hearth in the station master's quarters, the very room she was in. Next to the X was a single symbol, a circle with a dot in the center, the surveyor's mark for a control point, a point of known location and elevation, a point of truth. The fire crackled, spitting a shower of sparks. The wind howled outside. Elara stared at the map, her heart pounding a new fierce rhythm. This was not a random purchase. This was not a foolish whim. This was, somehow, an inheritance. Her father, in his quiet, methodical way, had led her here. The next morning, she awoke with a purpose that was as solid and real as the granite walls around her. She did not look at the ruin as a whole. She focused only on the hearth. It was a massive thing, built of rough-hewn river stones, mortared together with a coarse, sandy lime mix. She spent the morning clearing the debris from around it, sweeping away decades of dust and rat droppings. She consulted the map again. The X was on the left side, about 3 feet up from the hearth floor. She ran her hands over the stones. They were cold and solid. Nothing seemed out of place. Any other person would have given up, dismissed it as a meaningless doodle. But Elara trusted her father's precision. He did not do things without reason. She took out the brass plumb bob. Holding the string at the point marked on the map, she let the heavy brass tip hang down. It swayed for a moment, then settled, its point hovering a fraction of an inch from the face of a single large flat stone, a control point. She tapped the stone with her knuckles. It sounded just as solid as the others. But as she examined it more closely, her trained eye caught the anomaly. The mortar line around this specific stone was subtly different. It was a slightly lighter shade, and its texture was finer, less sandy. It was the work of a different hand, or the same hand at a different time. And the stone itself, while fitting snugly, did not have the same telltale signs of being a load-bearing part of the structure. It was a plug, a very, very good one. Excitement warred with her methodical nature. She forced herself to be patient. Using the small hammer and one of her father's sharpest chisels, she began to chip away at the mortar line. It was slow, painstaking work. She didn't want to damage the stone or announce her discovery to the world with loud banging. For hours, the only sounds were the gentle tink, tink, tink of her hammer and the scrape of the chisel. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she had cleared the mortar from all four sides. She put her tools down and placed her hands on the stone. She pushed. Nothing. She pulled. Nothing. Frustration pricked at her. Then she remembered her father's lessons on mechanics. It was not always about brute force. It was about understanding the design. She examined the edges again and found a small, almost invisible indentation on the bottom edge, a place for leverage. She inserted the flat end of her pry bar into the slot and leaned on it gently. There was a low grating sound, the protest of stone on stone after decades of silence. The block moved, tilting inward. She worked her fingers into the gap and pulled. The stone, heavy and awkward, swung into a dark cavity behind the hearth. A wave of cool, dry air washed over her face, a smell unlike the damp decay of the rest of the depot. It was the scent of a tomb, of deep, undisturbed stillness. It smelled of dry dust, of rust, and faintly of old leather. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She peered into the darkness. It was a small, stone-lined cavity about 2 feet square, and inside, sitting squarely in the center, was a heavy iron box bound with 2 thick straps. It was not large, perhaps the size of a bread box, but it looked immensely heavy. With trembling hands, she reached in and dragged it out. It took all her strength to pull it onto the dusty floor. The lock was a heavy, intricate brass mechanism, green with verdigris. There was no key. For a moment, she despaired. Then she saw the small, hinged latch on the side, held in place by a simple pin. It was not a lock meant to be opened with a key from the outside, but one meant to be secured from the inside. She used the tip of her chisel to work the pin loose. It came free with a small metallic sigh. She lifted the latch. The heavy lid creaked open. She stared. Her mind, so accustomed to ruin and want, could barely process what she was seeing. The box was filled, almost to the brim, with gold coins. Not a handful, but hundreds. They were not shiny and new, but bore the dull, heavy gleam of old circulated gold. Eagles and double eagles, neatly stacked in careful columns. A fortune, more money than she had ever imagined in her life. For a long time, she could only stare, her breath coming in shallow gasps. This was Silas Kane's gold, the ghost's treasure. The punchline to the town's joke was real, but beneath the top layer of coins, something else lay. She carefully lifted a few stacks out and found a leather-bound ledger, its cover embossed with the words Terminus Depot Station Log. Beneath that was a single sealed envelope, the wax stamp of the railroad company still intact, addressed simply to the finder. Her hands were shaking as she broke the seal. The paper was brittle with age. The ink was faded, but the handwriting was elegant, precise. To the one who finds this, it began. If you are reading this, then you are either a thief of uncommon skill or a soul with a spirit for forgotten places. I pray you are the latter. My name is Silas Kane. I was the architect and first station master of this depot. This building is my life's work, my testament in stone and timber. It was meant to be a gateway to the Cinder Peaks, a monument to progress and ambition. Instead, it has become my tomb. I was betrayed. My partner, a man I trusted as a brother, absconded with our company's funds and left me here with nothing but the payroll gold you have just discovered. He spread rumors in the East that I was the thief, that I had fled with the money. The railroad was never completed. The town, my dream, withered on the vine. I have remained a ghost in my own creation, too proud to leave and too broken to fight. This gold is a curse. It is the price of my failure. But perhaps, for you, it can be a beginning. The world believes me a scoundrel. My name is Mud. I have no heir, no one to carry my story. But this building is honest. Its stones are true, its lines are clean. Do not squander this gold on frivolities. Use it to give this place a second life. This depot deserves to hear the sound of work and life again, not just the wind's lament. The fortune is yours. A salary for a stewardship I now pass to you. Build a life here. Let this stone be your foundation, not your tomb. Find peace in the work of your hands. I never could. Yours in solitude, Silas Caney Lara read the letter 3 times, the brittle paper trembling in her hands. And then, for the first time since her father's death, she wept. They were not tears of grief or despair, but of a profound aching gratitude. She was not alone. Here, in this dusty ruin, she had found kinship with a ghost, a man separated from her by a century, but bound to her by a shared story of betrayal and a love for honest work. Silas Kane, Daniel, Ilara, they were a lineage of builders and surveyors, of people who found their solace in the true and the tangible. The gold was not a treasure, it was a toolbox. The letter was not a ghost story, it was a commission. The work began the next day. The grief and numbness had been scoured out of her, replaced by a cold, clear fire of purpose. She was no longer a victim, an outcast. She was the steward of Terminus Depot. Her first trip back to town was different. She walked with a new straightness in her spine. She did not flaunt her newfound wealth. Silas's gold remained hidden in its stone vault. But she used a single coin, an old $20 eagle, to establish a line of credit with Maeve, the woman who ran the general store. Maeve was a woman of indeterminate age, with eyes that missed nothing and a mouth that was a firm, uncompromising line. She looked at the gold coin, then at Ilara, then back at the coin. "Where did you get this?" she asked, her voice neutral. "I'm a woman of private means," Ilara replied, her voice steady. It was the truth in its way. Maeve nodded slowly, a flicker of something, respect perhaps, in her eyes. She weighed the coin, did the math, and opened a new page in her ledger. "What do you need?" Ilara's list was long and specific: canvas for a temporary roof patch, linseed oil, lye soap, sacks of lime and sand for mortar, nails of various sizes, glass panes, rope. She was not furnishing a house. She was provisioning an army for a long campaign. Maeve filled the order without comment, arranging for the teamster, the same one who had laughed at her, to deliver the goods. When he saw the sheer volume of supplies, his laughter died in his throat. The first task was to make her small corner of the depot livable. She scrubbed the ticket office from top to bottom with lye soap and hot water, the filth of decades washed away, revealing the rich grain of the oak floor and the clean, cold beauty of the granite walls. She patched the roof above her room, meticulously tarring the canvas. She reglazed the window, cutting the glass herself with a steady hand. Slowly, methodically, one small, perfect corner of the world was being brought back from chaos into order. Her days fell into a rhythm dictated by the sun and the task at hand. Mornings were for heavy work, clearing debris from the main hall, a monumental task that she undertook one wheelbarrow load at a time. She stacked the fallen roof slates, sorted the usable timbers from the rotten ones, and piled the rubble into neat mounds. Afternoons were for finer work, mixing mortar to Silas's original recipe, which she found in his station log. She began the painstaking process of chinking the walls, filling the gaps between the great stones to keep out the wind and the rain. Her work did not go unnoticed. The depot was visible from the high pass, and travelers on the road to the mining camps would sometimes stop and stare at the lone figure of a woman working tirelessly on the ruin. The joke in town began to change. It was no longer about the ghost of Silas Kane, but about the mad woman of the depot. She needed ironwork. The original window frames were intricate, fan-shaped affairs, and many were too rusted to be saved. The roof would eventually need new support brackets. There was only one blacksmith in Terminus, a man named Kalen. He was a giant of a man with a wild red beard and a temper that was said to be as hot as his forge. She went to him not with a request, but with a plan. She had found Silas's original architectural drawings in the ledger, and she had made her own copies, annotating them with her own precise measurements. She unrolled the drawings on his anvil. Kalen looked from the drawings to her, his expression thunderous. "You want what?" "I need 6 window frames to these specifications," she said, pointing with her finger, "and 12 roof brackets, type C. The drawings are to scale. The material should be wrought iron for ductility." He stared at the drawings, his professional eye overriding his skepticism. He picked one up, holding it close to the forge light. The drawings were good, more than good, they were professional. He grunted. "This is your work?" "The annotations are mine. The original design is Silas Kane's." He looked at her hands. They were not the hands of a lady. They were calloused, scraped, and stained, the hands of a worker. He grunted again, a sound that was a mix of surprise and grudging respect. "It'll cost you." I expect to pay for quality work, she replied. That was the beginning of her first alliance. Kalen made the ironwork, and it was perfect. When he delivered it himself, he expected to find her project stalled, her enthusiasm waned. Instead, he found half the main hall cleared and the walls of the east wing newly chinked, the mortar lines straight and true. He walked around her work site, not saying a word, just observing. He touched the new mortar with a thick finger. He sighted down the line of a repaired wall. Finally, he gave a single curt nod. You're using too much sand in your mix, he said, his voice a low rumble. The winter freeze will crack it. The local granite leaches acid. You need more lime. It was the most valuable piece of advice she had yet received. It was not offered as charity, but as a professional courtesy from one craftsman to another. The community, such as it was, began to slowly, cautiously accept her. Maeve started setting aside the best cuts of bacon for her. The teamster who delivered her supplies no longer dumped them in the yard, but helped her stack them under a lean-to she had built. They did not ask about her past or her money. They saw the evidence of her labor. In this harsh land, work was the only currency that truly mattered. Competence was the only creed. By the time the first snows of winter began to dust the peaks, Elara had transformed the depot. The main hall was not yet fully restored, but it was clear and weatherproofed. The station master's quarters were a warm, livable sanctuary, its windows glowing with lamplight in the evenings. The fire in Silas Kane's hearth had not gone out in months. Then the storm came. The locals called it a widowmaker, a blizzard that rolled down from the high passes with a sudden, murderous fury. The sky turned a terrifying shade of bruised purple, and the wind began to scream. Elara had just enough time to bring her last load of firewood inside and secure the storm shutters Kalen had helped her build. She was not afraid. The walls were 4 feet thick. The roof, which she had spent the entire autumn repairing with Kalen's brackets and timbers she had shaped herself, was strong. She stoked the fire, put a kettle on to boil, and settled in with Silas Kane's logbook. Her home was no longer a ruin, it was a fortress, and she was its keeper. The storm raged for 2 days. On the third morning, the wind died, and a strange luminous silence fell over the world. Elara opened the door to a landscape transformed, buried under 6 feet of immaculate white snow, and then she heard it, a faint cry, nearly swallowed by the immense silence. She pulled on her winter gear and followed the sound. Not far from the depot, half buried in a snowdrift, was a large wagon, one of its wheels shattered. A family, a man, a woman, and 2 small children were huddled together, their faces blue with cold. They were settlers, caught on the pass when the storm hit. She brought them inside. She wrapped the children in warm blankets and sat them by the fire. She gave the parents hot, sweet tea and broth. The woman wept with gratitude, and the man, his hands too numb to even hold a cup, could only nod his thanks, his eyes full of awe as he looked around the warm, solid room. Her small act of salvation did not go unnoticed. When the pass was cleared, the story of the family saved by the woman at the depot spread through Terminus and beyond. She had not just restored a building, she had restored its purpose. The Terminus depot was once again a sanctuary, a place of shelter at the edge of the wilderness. Spring came, and with it, a sense of completion. The last of the roof slates were laid. The final window was glazed. Elara had used some of the gold to buy the surrounding land, ensuring the valley would remain as pristine as Silas had left it. She planted a garden in the south-facing yard, the rich soil turning over easily under her spade. One bright afternoon, Kalen and Maeve rode out to see her. It was not a formal visit, but a quiet inspection. They walked through the restored depot, their footsteps echoing in the grand, sunlit main hall. The light streamed through the tall, arched windows, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. The oak floors shone with a fresh coat of oil. Kalen ran his hand over a massive timber beam that Elara had shaped with an adze and hoisted into place herself. Maeve touched the smooth, cool surface of the ticket counter, which Elara had painstakingly restored. Silas would be proud, Maeve said softly. Kalen just grunted, but it was a grunt of profound approval. He looked at Elara, at the quiet, competent woman who had turned a pile of rocks into a masterpiece. "What will you do now?" he asked. "The work is done." Elara looked around the great hall, at the play of light and shadow on the stone. "The work is never done," she said. "It just changes." In a small workshop she had built in the old baggage room, 2 objects lay on the workbench. On one side sat her father's brass plumb bob, its point still true, its surface glowing in the afternoon light. On the other side sat a small, intricately carved wooden bird, a small treasure she had found at the very bottom of Silas Kane's iron box, a small piece of beauty he had created in his solitude. Her two inheritances, side by side, the legacy of skill and the legacy of place. She was no longer an outcast, adrift and alone. She was Ilara of Terminus, the woman who had bought a ghost and built a home. She was a surveyor of forgotten places, a restorer of broken things, a quiet pillar in a community that valued what you could do over who you were. Her father had given her the tools to find the truth. Silas Kane had given her a foundation to build upon. She had done the rest. The $200 she had given the sneering clerk in the saloon had been an investment not in a property, but in herself. It was, she knew with a certainty, as solid as the granite walls around her, the best money she had ever spent.